Well, hello, Internet. Welcome to episode number 7 of Mutant Watchers. As you may have noticed, I'm not your typical host, Duna Holler. She is taking a well-earned rest and relaxation in the sun-kissed hills of Spain, where she is currently elevating herself to a higher consciousness. Duna, take all the rest you need. You're awesome. We'll hopefully see you back next week, but if we don't, it's okay. You've earned a little rest. So it's myself and Ross today. Jumping in. Hopefully Gabriel shows up. He was supposed to. I don't know what happened to him. I hope he's okay. But today we are talking about all things X-Force. So we're going to get everything from the Rob Fathers run to the 90s to the Kyle and Yost stuff. Hey, there's Gabriel. Come on, buddy. And all the way up to Reminder's run and current times. Hey, Gabe.
Hello.
Hey, guys.
Welcome to the show. Such as it is. So, yeah, we're just jumping right in. I was thinking we could just kind of start doing a run back through like a celebration of all things X-Force, starting at the very start. X-Force number 1, April 1991. This bad boy hits shelves. It is the golden child of one Robert Percival Liefeld, and who had, of course, made a splash in New Mutants the year prior, taking over, kind of turning it into his own thing. And then X-Force hits like a bomb. And at the time, it sold 5 million copies and was the number 1 selling comic of all time. You can chalk that up to a lot of things. You can chalk that up to the collector's bubble at the time. You can chalk that up to Liefeld simply being the hot new young buck on the block as far as art goes. You can chalk that up to it being the 90s and everything with Tude was awesome and we loved it for it, right? But it's depending on who you are, if you're a Liefeld partisan or not. it can be a little bit of a divisive run. Guys, what do you think about the Liefeld era of X-Force?
Go ahead, guy.
Okay, I am actually a fan of that era of X-Force. It definitely had something, and maybe it's nostalgia, maybe it's the vibe of those 90s X comics, but it definitely had a sense of family of the members that I didn't pick up as much from the later, edgier, grittier, darker versions of X-Force that came our way. There was a bond among the members, which maybe just because they had been together since, for the most of them, since New Mutants or Marvel graphic novels number 4, it was a history of the characters together that made me fond of it to this day. Okay. What about you, Ross?
Okay. Yeah, the X-books were hot at the time. Rob was hot at the time. And, for all the stuff that surrounds Rob Liefeld, some of his own making and some of it of the fans' making, he opened the door to doing an X-book that was really diverging from the normal path of what we were seeing in the main X books. This was becoming tougher. They were, it was very different from what I was reading in the other books, and that was what the attraction was. Sure, there was the art as well. Rob's art is always a point of contention with a lot of people. I think you either love it or you hate it. I don't think there's anything in between. And I mean, early on, I loved the art. I won't lie. I thought New Mutants 100 going into X-Force, when I saw that on the shelf and I see Jim Lee next to it or Andy Kubert, I wanted to read all of it, you understand? So I think it was the right set of circumstances, the right artist doing the right thing with the product at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, X-Force number 1 and those Liefeld issues in particular are absolutely a product of their time, right? And both in terms of 100%. Execution and marketing, and just the fact that we were, this is not early 1991. We're moving from an 80s X-Men ethos to something different, something new. And X-Force really represented that shift, because traditionally speaking, the X-Men were almost always on the defensive in a lot of ways with regards to Xavier's dream and coexistence with mankind. And X-Force took that and turned it on its ear. And it really, because they were out there striking first. And they were not afraid to break the law, which, I mean, of course, the X-Men sometimes by their mere existence broke the law, but they were not afraid to mix it up with S.H.I.E.L.D., for example, if they needed to. And it's just a really interesting evolution in a lot of ways. And, you know, those was it 9 issues? Yeah, it was 9 issues of X-Force that Liefeld did before he bounded away to help form Image. They're almost a time capsule of early 90s comics. And
100%.
you know, you're not going to read them and come away feeling like you would if you read an Alan Moore comic, you know? It's very brash and in your face, and it was supposed to be. That was the point.
It's flashy.
Yeah, it's big dumb fun. And there's nothing wrong with big dumb fun, assuming it's executed properly. Like when big dumb fun tries to pretend that that's not what it is, you generally wind up with a Michael Bay movie or something of that nature, if I could make the comparison. And I mean, I just think that, I mean, no, we're not talking about masterpiece theater in terms of storytelling, but there's some really cool stuff to come out of there. I mean, you've got brand new characters like Shatterstar and Feral that were introduced at the tail end of New Mutants that get chances to shine. You've got Cannonball and Boom Boom, who was, I think she was going by Boomer by that point, but she'll always be Boom Boom.
Yeah, she was Boomer. She was Boomer at that point.
Okay, she'll always be Boom Boom. You know, we've got them becoming their own characters and kind of the percolation of their romantic relationship at the time too. Shoot, you got Siren comes in. I believe it's in issue 4 when they had the crossover with Adjectiveless Spider-Man for fighting Juggernaut around the world, or at least in a building that he was far too big to be in comfortably, proportionately. There's lots of things that would become these bedrock factors that later writers would, especially the next one we're going to talk about, was able to build upon. And let's also just say, you got this guy named Deadpool showing up for issue number 2. And that's his second appearance. So Deadpool, or because of Deadpool, X-Force number 2 has a little bit of value to it. I'm glad I have my copy. So, Rob does his thing. He bounces, helps form Image, and you've got Fabian Nicieza taking over full time. Now, Fabian had been doing dialogue duties over Rob's plots because, you know, Rob, young kid, no writing experience. Marvel knew his name would sell, but maybe you need a little help with the script. No big deal. Nicieza had been around for a while at this point, and then as of issue 15, and Domino. Thank you, Duna. Domino.
Don't forget Domino.
Domino represents big time in those early X-Force. Although
it was copycat.
That's a story for another time. But issue, I believe, 15, Greg Capullo comes on as the artist. And holy cow, everything really snaps together at that point. At least for me.
Yeah. Richter comes in.
Yeah, Capullo comes in. He and Fabian just really, really gel. And the book takes what it had been built on and really gets focused. and it really sets itself apart as a quality X-Men book with a very standalone theme that just kicked ass. And then Richter joined. Gabe?
Yes,
Yep.
Richter's my man. So
That was your cue, bro.
Yes, there we go. So I actually recently went back and read a lot of those Richter-centric issues, and it's sad that Duna's not here to speak to the history of Richter before X-Force, other than in the comments she's lurking around. But that's where I got a 5 for him, and his friendship with Shatterstar, and his animosity with Cable, which was a really driving force. And it really, that's where I picked up on that family vibe, a very dysfunctional family, where it's all kinds of nonsense and fighting, and Cable is hands down the worst dad on the face of the earth. Since
He's not worse than Wolverine.
True, he doesn't kill any of them, but he has this habit of like getting in these big fights and then just leaving.
Yeah.
And it's like, the building's crumbling down. And he's just, Cable's gone. I'm sure they'll get out of this crumbling building with bombs and explosives and shields closing in. They'll be fine. And then he'll just hop back in, and X-Force will be upset with him for like an issue.
Yeah, he's interesting at this point because he's very much the military man that you will follow orders at all times, but he's also does the Wolverine thing where I'm out of here, I got something to do in the future, see you around. You know, it's an interesting balance at this point between the two, and it causes a lot of dynamics within the team.
Right. Well, and another thing about Cable that hadn't been fully established by this point was the fact that he's infected with the techno-organic virus, right? Because visually, Liefeld and subsequently Capullo had drawn him as though he were a T-800 with fake skin, right? So it's interesting to see that evolution occur, because definitely by, I don't know, deeper into Nicias's run, you start to see that's changing. We're not seeing the individual circuitry or cyborg parts, if you will, in Cable anymore. It becomes more about the techno-organic virus, which, as it would be slowly revealed that he was, in fact, Christopher Summers, becomes a central part of his character. So lots of interesting evolution going on because, the characters that we know and love now, Cable, Deadpool, Domino, Weapon X / Kane. No, nobody cares about him. They start at these basic points, and subsequent writers are given the opportunity to build them up and change what they are, and hopefully it's in an additive, not the subtractive way. But like Domino, for example, I'm glad Duna brought Domino up, because what we find out in X-Force number 11 is that the person we thought was Domino was actually a shapeshifter named Copycat the whole time. Domino doesn't have her quote-unquote true first appearance until X-Force number 11, which incidentally is Liefeld's last cover. It's got Deadpool fighting Domino on the cover, and Shatterstar's kind of floating. Yeah. And lots of little interesting tidbits that younger readers might not know about. Let's see. Duna has jumped in and says, I think it's really, really sweet, the point where Richter goes from traumatized, insecure teenager in Louise's run, represent, to what Nicieza does with him as someone who is always kind of growing a lot too soon. It flows very well. That's interesting, actually. I don't know. Gabe, what are your thoughts on that?
So like I said, I don't know as much about the New Mutants Richter because I haven't had the chance to go back and read all of that. But I agree with the sense of growth. It's kind of like what you're saying with the writers building off on it. As you were talking about that, I realized that, when X-Force started, a lot of the characters were just these cardboard cutouts of the man's man, big guns, 1,000 patches, biceps the side of a human baby. and they ended up growing from there. You know, Shatterstar and Richter's friendship, Domino becoming an actual character and not just copycat, Cable and his past, even a little bit, not as much as the others, but Feral going from this literal feral creature to a woman with a traumatized past. It really allowed for a lot of growth from these kind of stereotypes of characters.
Definitely.
Fabian put in more of a soap opera feel because he started to flesh them out. He started to look at Siren's past and her battle with alcoholism and Ireland and Cannonball in Kentucky and Richter in Mexico. He actually was starting to add all of those background elements at this point in time. And it was becoming less of a, hey, you guys, let's go get him, and more of a dysfunctional family trying to find their way.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's quite and a lot of that happened in Fabian's run. It set the precedent going forward.
And I mean, he was concurrently working similar storytelling awesomeness in Adjectiveless X-Men at the time, which he took over writing full time after Jim Lee left the book. So, I mean, for a certain generation of X-Men fans, you know, the name Fabian Nicieza is just inextricably linked with X-Men lore. Period. He's one of the greats.
And of that period, because there's certain names. Fabian's one of them. If you add artists, it's Capullo, Kubert, Lee, all of that period. You when you think of the 90s comics, there's maybe 4 or 5 people you think of. Fabian's one of them, definitely.
Larry Hama on X-Men.
Absolutely.
You know, Lobdell. You know, recent personal failings aside, I mean, the man made his mark on X-Men.
Correct.
So yeah, I mean, Capullo's run goes on. We've got the Executioner Song, epic crossover. I feel like, excuse me, I feel like I could probably fill an entire episode talking about that, like issue by issue, but I won't do that to you guys. It's the greatest X-Men crossover of all time, and you'll never convince me differently. You know, the quote unquote death of Cable, which grew the monthly Cable series out of it. So, you know, the kids are running around without Cable now, and they got to find their own way. And they get into a fight up in Grey Malkin, which was Cable's satellite, with War Machine, which was totally cool, totally awesome stuff. Cable, of course, eventually returns, and you know, the kids have grown. They don't necessarily need a teacher anymore, and that's one of those great moments in that particular run is Cable having to adjust to the fact that his pupils have graduated. Right?
Yeah, but he comes with a little less hard edge attitude, though. He kind of realizes that he's not pushing them around anymore because they're older, they're more experienced, and he has to kind of lead more than just command.
Yeah.
At that point.
And pull back a little bit too, you know, because Cannonball had been running the show and he proved to be an incredibly capable leader.
Which most writers then forgot a couple of years later.
Listen, we're gonna get to that Jeff Lieb's because I got some and you know, as Nicieza's run continued, Tony Daniel took over on art. And
he was fantastic.
I've never personally gotten into Tony Daniel. Honestly, I don't know what it is about his art that just doesn't. I don't dislike him. It's just, I don't know. He's just Tony Daniel, and that's nothing against him. It's just a matter of my personal taste. But you know, the book starts taking some chances, like Feral, for example, the revelation that she killed her sister and let her mom die. I mean, they turned Feral into a true villain, and she was probably, of all the characters, the one that had the most blank slate to her up to that point. And then we get to the issue Fabian's last issue of X-Force. I believe it's number 43, right before Age of Apocalypse, and it's this quiet issue with lots and lots of strong character work. And we have this really, really awesome moment with Richter and Shatterstar where some storytelling seeds are planted that future writers would really, really harvest and run with. And Gabe, I think you probably can talk about that better than I can.
So I believe, if my memory, I'm not always good with the numbers, that was when Richter left the team to go back to Mexico? Is that right?
No, it's the one where Rainfire was revealed to be future Sunspot.
Mm-hmm.
And Shatterstar is embarrassed because he's never had sex.
Oh, the club scene
consoles him and is like, he says, quote
yes,
unquote, I've never hit a home run either.
Yes, the club scene was such a looking back at it from this perspective, I think it's very powerful. It kind of says a lot that it's not saying, but I feel like in the time it was a bit of an odd scene and a little bit awkward just with how Shatterstar is. There we go. How Shatterstar is just terrified of just interacting with a female person.
Yes.
And needs to be consoled by Richter, who up to the point in this comic has been like chatting with ladies, flirting with them, and then just to pretty much come out and say that he's a virgin without saying he's a virgin. In hindsight, I love it, but in actuality, I'm a little bit like, this must have seemed so awkward in the time to read. But I love how it fits into the story of Richter and Shatterstar, because it really shows how much he was relying on Julio to just be a functional person.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those moments, and 90s comics and frankly pop culture is kind of rife with them, where it's obvious that we're talking about the gay thing, or that shit, as Juma has just put it, without actually saying it. So it's frustrating, but at the same time, it's at least some kind of a step forward, as opposed to like, pretending they didn't exist, or whatever in the closet bullshit you want to prescribe to for the further away times. So like that's an important issue, and it leaves off. Age of Apocalypse happens, and then our buddy Jeff Lieb takes over. And I'm not a fan of that run. He took one of my favorite comics that I was buying at the time and basically threw away everything I loved about it. X-Force was now working directly with the X-Men. They had
back in the mansion,
matching uniforms.
That was editorial decision.
Just bugs me on an aesthetic level.
Purple and yellow.
Yeah, the Boom Boom's acting wildly out of character. Caliban joined the team, which was interesting.
Yes, Caliban joins the team, yeah.
Because that was kind of part of his rehab for having been turned into forced to become a Horseman of Apocalypse. So that's an interesting. There's some interesting ideas in there, but ultimately this era of X-Force is the first one for me that's just a swing and a miss.
That's one where I actually disagree with you there.
Okay.
Because besides the uniforms, which were, I don't know who let that happen. But aside from there, I actually liked some of the stuff they did with the characters. And by all means, interrupt me if I'm kind of jumping ahead to the next writer.
No, go ahead.
It all merges in. But the bit with Boom Boom and Sabretooth and her just so frantically clinging to anyone she can kind of call a family, and it just turning on her much like her own dad did. Siren and Deadpool have that one comic where Siren is mourning Siren and Shatterstar have that comic where Siren is mourning the fact that she screwed up her relationship with Warpath. That wasn't really a relationship. And for the first time, they flat out say that Richter and Shatterstar are more than friends, even though he won't admit it. It's a big parallel between the two, as I think they're sparring to try to deal with the fact that they screwed up their relationships that they don't want to admit were relationships. And then they I like the throwback in that same issue to the history between Siren and Deadpool that everyone tries to forget is a thing.
Yes.
I felt like I liked a lot of what they did in there, and if I may be jumping ahead too far now, but is that also when we got the first really huge hint about Karma being a lesbian at the Burning Man festival?
I think.
Or am I jumping a couple of?
I think you're jumping ahead a couple writers, but Rob, you might know better than that, or internet in general. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that one. Now, Boomer at this point becomes Meltdown.
I feel like it's a little early for that, but now one thing they did do that I did like, and it was in the first issue of Jeff Lieb's run, was having Cannonball graduate, quote unquote, joining
the X-Men.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, no New Mutant had ever graduated to be to the big leagues before, and that was really cool. I mean, it does suck that he his character was so overwhelmed by this fact that he kind of regressed in terms of his maturity and ability to handle himself in the Uncanny X-Men proper title. But at the same time, the essence of it was pretty cool. Okay. Duna's saying the Karma thing is around issue number 90. Doesn't remember who wrote it. I feel like that's John Francis Moore at that point, but maybe that's after him.
Could be.
I don't know. We should probably have known that.
I agree with you. I like the concept of Cannonball graduating to the X-Men. And I guess how he's handled an X-Men is a completely different topic than what the show is about, because he's no longer on the pages of X-Force. But while it did give him some good moments, like when he took out Gladiator, it was a personality regression that irks me to this day, because I feel there's some ways he hasn't recovered fully.
I think I don't think there's anything I disagree with in that statement, actually. So
me neither.
But after Lieb leaves, John Francis Moore takes over. I'm not at all familiar with that run, so I can't speak to it remotely. I know Warpath started flying around that time, which just seems weird to me. And at that point, though, sales kind of start going downwardly on the book.
Yeah, they're spiraling down at this point.
Doesn't want to lose the book. And so it becomes one of 3 books that is handed to Warren Ellis in the year 2000 that he's given free reign to do whatever he wants. And the book totally shifts, right? They're working with, it's almost a Black Ops book now.
Yeah, here comes Counter X, yes.
Yeah, Counter X. And they're working with Pete Wisdom. And it takes on those very familiar, if you're familiar with Warren Ellis's writing, Ellis traits. Lots of ink,
dark and cynical,
dark. Yeah, it's got very dark and cynical, and I mean, it's fine for what it is,
but it doesn't go anywhere sales wise.
Right. The Counter X stuff for that X-Men and Generation X was it came with a lot of hype and a lot of expectations, but it just didn't light the world on fire, unfortunately.
I feel like there was a lot of hype for it, but when it came out, well, wasn't reading it when it came out, but in hindsight, when I read it after the fact, it just kind of puttered for me. It just didn't grab my interest. It felt like it lost a lot of the elements that made me really like X-Force. And
it went from being X-Force to a Warren Ellis comic, And I mean, he couldn't have been a hotter writer at the time. He had the Authority. He had Planetary going on. I mean, hell, I'd have let him take my bottom 3 selling X books and do whatever the hell he wanted with them.
And the fact that that's my least favorite part of the X-Force run and my least favorite part of the Generation X run, I find hilarious because I like Authority. I'm a big fan of it, and it just didn't translate to me in the X world.
Yeah, it's just a little bit of a weird fit. Although I will say, and this is slightly off topic, but of those 3 books, the stuff Ellis did with X-Man resonated the most with me just as a reader, but also, in recent times with Age of X. So, turning Nate Gray into a sort of messiah figure, or as Ellis himself put it at the time, the shaman of the mutant race, which is an inherently meaningless phrase that sounds cool, but whatever. Nobody else was doing anything interesting with Nate Gray at the time.
Yeah.
So it kind of putters along. It doesn't work out. And then everything internally at Marvel flips on its head. Joe Quesada takes over. He starts bringing in all this big talent that had never worked for Marvel before. People like Garth Ennis, people like Peter Milligan, and
Allred.
Yeah, the Allreds. Well, I feel like the Allreds at some point had done something at Marvel, but I can't put my finger on what it had been. But they'd certainly never been given a spotlight like they did when they took over on X-Force and turned it into a completely new book with completely new characters that was a huge, giant parody. And Ross, what are your thoughts on this tenure of X-Force?
Yeah, it was a surprise. I don't think I was ready for it. I have to be honest with you. It was such a complete change. Because, I mean, I wouldn't say that I hated it when it happened, but I wasn't ready for it. And the first couple of issues, I was like, what are we actually doing here? And then you kind of grasp what they were actually going for. It takes a couple of issues to get into it, but it's a very short burst before the book gets cancelled, and then it becomes ecstatics. So I wouldn't say I hated it, but I wasn't ready for it, and I didn't actually know what to make of it at the time.
Yeah.
Years later, having gone back and read all of it again, it's actually a really good little part of the whole X-Force history.
But nobody knew what to think about this comic, right? I mean, it's you get to the end of the first issue and the entire team except for like one character is dead. And it was deliberately built that way around the expendability of these characters, and the whole thing was like this big sardonic commentary on the idea of being famous, the idea of, well, I guess just mostly just fame, but also working for the government in general and celebrity. And it's very, very, very ahead of its time, I think. And so, like most things that are ahead of their time, it didn't fare well in terms of sales. Nobody knew what the hell to make of it.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
But Peter Milligan's like that dude. You cannot pin his career down to any one genre or comic or anything. Like, he has written a little bit of just every freaking thing imaginable and every theme or type of comic for pretty much every publisher, or at least the major ones. But I mean, his X-Force and Ecstatics run has got to be one of the big high watermarks of his career for me. I haven't read the whole thing, but what I have read, I've got fond memories of. And holy God, it was violent. Like, it was over the top violent. Like, if you look, very fun. it says, "Hey kids, look, no code," because this was when we still had comics code.
Correct.
And this was definitely an R-rated comic, which was pretty cool. Gabriel, did you read any of X-Force?
And that was
I tried several times. I gave it a shot, and then I multiple times through the years I've gone back. And I can respect it for the message it was trying to give, but the delivery was done with characters that grated me, with plot points that annoyed me. Even if it has a lot of depth, everything on the surface just made me not care enough to pick up another issue. So I won't say I hate that later X-Force and X Status run, but I will definitely say I'm not one of the many people who love it now. Just was not at all for me. It also gave us Dupe, so I'll never forgive him for that.
You leave X-Men alone. Dupe.
And that kind of closes out volume 1 of it, and that that kind of closed out volume 1 of X-Force. That was it.
That's it for X-Force for a number of years. I mean, somewhere in there.
That's a 10-year. What? That's about a 10-year run.
Yeah, that's it.
So you went away then?
Yeah, it goes away for a while. There is no X-Force. There's lots of interesting things percolating in the world of X-Men at the time, though. Kind of off on its own little island. You've got Joss Whedon and John Cassaday's Astonishing X-Men, which is like my second favorite X-Men run, period, ever, because it's just so awesome. I mean, you've got Claremont returned for a while, and he actually wasn't bad. You've got lots of interesting evolutionary things like Laura X-23 shows up. You've got, I mean, Ross, help me out. There's a lot of interesting things going on in the world of the X-Men at the time, including House of M, which had a profound effect on the world of the X-Men, which, I mean, honestly, we're still feeling 15 years later. Yeah. And somewhere in that time, though, we have the X-Men start their own nation called Utopia. It's an island. It's kind of a Magneto-ish idea. Mutants living on their own. Now, obviously, at this point in history, the X-Men mutants had Genosha, and that went kind of poorly for them, just say the least. Right? And one of the things that comes out of the formation of Utopia, though, is this new X-Force. And the new X-Force is basically Cyclops's Black Ops assassination squad. And it's a really...
I'm going to roll you back. I'm going to roll you back there for a sec.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Remember, we've got between that point in 2004, Rob comes back.
Oh,
yes.
And does a really short burst and decides to try and retcon and insert all the dialogue into the books, and there's some controversy around it. And it's a very, very short period. It's 2004 to 2005.
How many issues?
Basically, I'm not even sure. And then
it wasn't many. I don't even think it made it out of single digits.
No. Yes, and then you got a Shatterstar mini out of it too.
Yes.
So I'm gonna be the odd one here and say that I actually really enjoyed those two little mini series. The X-Force, I think it's called X-Force and Cable or something. I think it was like 6 issues, and then you get a 4-issue X-Force Shatterstar series.
That's right. That's right.
I remember it very fond. That's actually what I was trying to look up. Like, when was this? I'm a big fan of it, mostly because something about the art I just find to be extremely nice to look at. I don't know if it's the art itself or the colors. It's been a while since I looked back at it, but it just really drew me to it. And it also, despite being so quick to end, it actually did set up a couple of things that I found to be pretty interesting in the main comics, because it sets up Cable and Deadpool, which then runs for, I think, like 67 issues because I believe it is in that miniseries that they or join together for the body sliding, which really sparks off the Cable and Deadpool. And it also takes place in this very tiny window in between when Cannonball left Extreme, right before he joined up with, I think it was Uncanny X-Men or Extreme X-Men, after he got like a broken leg from the Fury, and it fit really snug in the continuity in a way that I did like, and gave, for me, what I found to be some pretty nice scenes for the characters, like Boom Boom and her exploding sword, and extreme kung fu skills that I don't remember her ever using anywhere else. And I think that was the only time I liked Boom Boom in a yellow outfit.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, I was thinking back on it because I was trying to do a little bit of mental research running up to this. I probably should have taken physical notes. Shame on me. Bad host. But there's a lot of X-Men stuff from the 2000s that I just flat out not familiar with outside of the main X-Men books. And Astonishing X-Men, and then X Factor, which we talked about in the last episode. Outside of that, like Cable and Deadpool, this little brief X-Force run, Young X-Men, I don't know anything about those characters. So I've got a lot of homework to do, actually, in that era. Especially, and Knoll will pop up, or Rockslide will pop up from time to time. I'm like, shit, I still don't know about this guy.
Who is this person?
Who is this person? Yeah.
But I mean, for the most part, like X-Force goes dormant for a number of years, and other than
about 3.
What?
Oh, I thought you said 3 years before we see them. Yeah, but about 3 years before we see it.
We've got the new X-Force comes up, and I want to say this was in 07, maybe 08.
Yeah,
volume
3 is officially 08.
Yeah, it's spun out of Messiah Complex.
Yes. And this version of X-Force is fully authorized and known only by Cyclops. It's run by Wolverine. It's got a bit of an odd pairing of or grouping of people in it because Warpath is in there, which hell yeah, that's my guy. X-23 was there. Wolfsbane got really awkwardly jerked out of X Factor, which
Cyclops
at the time.
Cyclops.
Yes, and yeah, they start running around, and this is when the book starts to look like the most modern incarnation. Well, not the DOX version, but like what a more modern reader, somebody I don't know,
would be familiar with. Yeah,
would be more familiar with, right? And this is a pretty cool run. From what I've read, I haven't read the whole thing, but Kyle and Yost are a solid writing team, and they had Clayton Crane on art, I believe, for most of that run.
Yeah, they did.
Or at least
most of that run, yeah.
Gorgeous comic.
Yeah. And it gets dark. It gets really dark in places. Like
you've got Crusher, and it's mostly at night, and it's black, and it's red eyes and black costumes, and heads being blown off, and sharp teeth and claws and wings.
Yeah,
I mean, it's really at this point, it's really violent. I mean, if you go, I mean, I've been reading it again. It's a violent comic.
They bring back Boom Boom just to kill her, and
Did
then
they really?
Yep, and 100%. Then they ended it. Yep, they left the X-Force team, left Boom Boom tied to a chair for her to get shot in the face by the Leopard Queen.
What?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I like that version of X-Force, but there was a couple of things about it that to this day still kind of irk me. Partially because I feel like with the writer switch and the timing, X-Force replaced New X-Men, which is one of a comic run I love. But it also kind of took the title of X-Force and tied it to Wolverine in a way that just continued from then on. Even now to this day, where that is kind of a team that he has become associated with.
Yeah.
But despite all that, I still liked it. It was interesting.
And this is where you start to see the idea that X-Force is the violent X-Men comic, so to speak. You know? Not just that they're working outside of the law or they've got a little bit of a harder edge than your typical X-Men, but this is the violent grown-up. Well,
they're a kill squad.
Yeah, they're a kill squad.
They're a kill squad.
Exactly.
They're a black ops squad. That's what they are.
They recruit Vanisher by literally giving him a brain tumor.
Yeah.
Yep.
That is how they get their transport person, by making a teenager give someone a brain tumor and having another set of teenagers wipe everyone's memory in between missions.
100%. There's bad choices throughout this run. I mean, they don't shy away from them just doing the wrong thing. I mean, Laura, when Wolfsbane's a prisoner at one point, she just decides to break the rules, go in, blow the whole place up, half killing everybody else. Fortunately, Wolfsbane's been pulled away. This run is filled with those kind of bad decisions. And I think one thing I like about this run. Sorry.
I said, doesn't Wolfsbane eat her father figure in this run, the Reverend? Did he kill him or eat him or maim him? Something dark and gruesome.
I remember her maiming him at one point, but I was thinking the next
one point, yeah.
But yeah, I definitely agree. It was a lot of odd choices.
Yeah, and I mean stuff like that happening with Wolfsbane is incredibly out of character for her. Incredible.
Yeah, I mean, when you read that, when I read that run for the first time, and I'm like, why are they putting her here? That's the first question. Is like, I can understand everybody else, and even Wolverine says to Cyclops, "Why are you putting her here? She doesn't belong here." And that's another thing I enjoy about the run. You know, despite Wolverine can be quite a hypocrite when it comes to doing the right thing and killing, because he'll say Wolverine's very much do as I say, not do as I do. You understand? Yes. And the thing is, and I like that interplay in this run, because he's constantly trying to get X-23 out the squad. He doesn't want her to be this killer, and she's constantly pushing back. And in fact, Cyclops is pushing back at the same time. Going, well, she's here. And he gets her to do stuff without telling Wolverine. You know what I'm saying? So I really enjoy that dynamic in this particular run.
Yeah. And this is the era of X-Men lore where Cyclops just really becomes a dick. Like, he just starts owning it. He's always been a dick, but this is where he owns it.
Yeah, it's kind of that change from the straight-laced. There's you know, there's a crossover point here somewhere, where we go from being the straight-laced, do it by the book, to what it's going to have, what it later becomes. You understand? And what ultimately culminates in him getting the Phoenix Force. And
Messiah
Complex. This
is kind of the catalyst for that.
For that, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, he goes from a Boy Scout to being the leader of a dying race.
Yeah,
he's the revolution. He becomes a revolutionary, basically.
He becomes Magneto. I mean, in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, there's a conversation to be had, probably not in this episode, but at some point, about the way that the X-Men have, over the years, moved closer to Magneto, just in general, than they are Xavier.
I've moved closer to Magneto than I have Xavier over the years. So.
Hey, listen. Yeah. Yes.
2020 will do that to a guy.
Yeah. But getting back to this run now, I mean, this run, as dark as it is, it's got good things. Like the Leper Queen is a great character. It is Necrosha is a hell of a good crossover. I mean, I love X-Men and vampire nonsense, so maybe that's just me. Crane's art is an acquired taste for a lot of people, actually. You know, I enjoy it, but for some people, it's not their cup of tea. And I hear that still sometimes.
He's an odd artist because, like, if you look at the way he paints people's faces, they're kind of soft and have sort of anime-ish qualities to them. But then if you look at the whole template, the whole page of what he's doing, it's just dark and just drenched in black. And
correct. And so for Necrosha, he was actually perfect. He was actually for Necrosha and everything being dark and at night and with vampires, he was actually a perfect artist.
Yeah. So, I mean, Clay, I think he's a good fit for that run.
Mm-hmm.
Without
it worked for the tone and everything about it. It was a good fit.
Absolutely. So from there, we move into one that I know Ross has been chomping at the bit for us to get to, and that is Uncanny X-Force Volume 1 by Rick Remender. And now Wolverine's still leading the team, but it's without Cyclops' knowledge. Psylocke is a member, Phantom X, Deadpool, Archangel, and good God, I can't say enough awesome about this run.
And it opens up with Deadpool and Jerome Opina, and from the first word, it is okay. It's absolute shit show for the team at the time, but it's just everything is on point. The characterization is almost perfect. Deadpool is not some one-dimensional parody. He's actually
he's a human being.
Remender kind of tones him back to being a human being.
Yeah,
I mean, he's still bizarre, and there's a point with him and Warren where he's dragging Warren, trying to rescue Warren and get him, sort him out because he's injured. But every character in this run had a level of depth. I mean, I came to this run later. I didn't read it as it came out. It just had a depth from page 1 that's consistent through like 5 arcs all the way to the end.
Yeah,
with a change of characters. And it's got 2 of the best artists working on it. It's got Jerome Pina and Isard Rubik, and it's just, I mean, I don't think there's anything bad I could say about this run. That being said, that Arc 1 is good. Arc 2 is okay. The Deathlock the arc wasn't as appealing to me as the first one, and then we move into the Dark Angel.
Yes,
it's called the Dark Angel, and that's probably the best part. That's where it peaks.
Yes,
and then we've got 2 other arcs after that.
Yeah, that's right.
I said, all I can say is good things about it. I can't say any. There's nothing. I mean, everybody's. What I like about that run is Wolverine's not a focal point.
He's really not
of that run. He's not. He's giving orders and he's carrying on. It's Elizabeth and Warren.
Yeah,
and a couple of the other characters, but those are actually the 2 focal points. And we get Genesis later, and we've got some Dakin towards the end, and we've got a bit of Phantom X too. But those are the 2 focal points, and that I think that's probably one of the things I enjoyed about it. Because you would expect that run to be about Wolverine. It's really not.
Well, and it's a good counter to the previous X run, which went so dark, because the underlying theme of the entire Uncanny X-Force run by Remender is dealing with the consequences of doing this really dark, bloody stuff. Psychologically. All the time. And there's some brilliantly high concept stuff going on there too, with the world and the death
Genesis
from the Celestials, or Death Seed, excuse me. And just utterly brilliant from start to finish. Like you said, there's really not a false note for me in this run.
Guys ready to...
You drop quiet. We're talking about.
So I'm gonna be the odd man out again, and I'm not a fan of this run. I agree with the Deadpool aspect that it did flesh him out a lot better. But Deadpool is one of those characters, oddly enough, also like Gwenpool, that I find a lot more tolerable in a group setting because it tones down everything that they go wild with in their solo titles. And it kind of presents them, instead of this wall breaking character, as everyone else just kind of thinks of them as crazy, but maybe they're not. And it works well for me when Deadpool is on an X team, just like it worked well for me when Gwenpool was on an Avengers team. But other than Deadpool, I was not a big fan, and maybe it's because I cut out too early. I hear what you guys are saying, that it was a matter of dealing with the repercussions of these dark actions from the last arc, but for me, at least, maybe it's because I ducked out after the first arc or two. It felt trying too hard to be dark. I think in the first couple of issues, they shoot a kid in the face. There's a scene where Deadpool is keeping Archangel alive by cannibalism. It was just trying. It felt trying too hard to me, and I just couldn't get into it. And
it takes itself very seriously. There's very little. It's a lot of melodrama, back to back, all the time. You don't get a lot of resting points. You know, as good as the run is, and as much as I love it, it's not a fun run. There aren't high points of humor like you get even in the current X-Force run. Percy's found a way to actually put some really cool humor into it. And even though you've got Deadpool in there, he's not as funny as he's usually been. You know what I'm saying?
Dark.
So he's dark, and it's a very heavy book. You're constantly going through drama, and I think that's also possibly why for some people as well. I came back to it. I didn't start with it as well, and it was just so impressive that I burned through the entire thing. I literally started at the beginning and burned through it. I didn't take any breaks. And I think when you read something like that as well, it's a lot easier than when you go read one arc, take a break, come back to it, etc. But it does take itself very seriously. I mean,
you said it focused a lot on Betsy and Warren, and as you're talking about it, I'm realizing it focuses on them, but I'm pretty sure that is my least favorite version of both of those characters. For Warren, I get really tired of the I am the Horseman of Death, I am evil incarnate. It gets exhausting, and I think this actually starts for me when I stopped caring about Betsy a lot. She essentially came off of, with a break in there, she was over, in the Claremont Uncanny and the Extreme X-Men. She comes back to life. She's over in Exiles for a bit, and then she joins this team as to be the Conscience, but ends up becoming as dark as the rest of them. And,
yes, and actually,
that kind of sticks with her up until she gets her British body back. And it's just an era of Psylocke I'm not a fan of.
That's interesting.
No, you're right, because in the next run of X-Force, where she's on the team with Cable and everything else, they examine her addiction to violence.
And this is
her trying to deal with her. This is the Spurrier run. So she's on the team. Why is she on the team? X, Y, and Z are on the team, all for reasons. She doesn't have any reason to be there, but she's there because she's addicted to the violence. And so it does. You're right. She becomes much darker, and it does play out further down the line as well.
The only thing, and I think I'm jumping to the next run of Uncanny X-Force, but the only thing about Psylocke that I like in this was her coming out as bisexual, which then they also never talk about ever again, when she has that weird relationship throuple thing with Phantom X and female Phantom X Cluster, while evil Phantom X is stalking them. It got very convoluted very quickly and hurt my head a little.
Looking at my notes, because that's right towards the end of the run, if I'm not mistaken.
And then it continues on to the next run. I think it happened, the Phantom X splits in the final issue or something, but we don't meet the multiple runs.
Again, thanks to Deadpool, because Deadpool brings him back but messes it up. So he comes back as three
go figure.
separate entities. Yeah.
That's what happens when you trust Deadpool to do things.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Well, he's a convenient gaff because you don't want to actually label. If I'm a writer, I don't want to go blame a character that I know I'm going to be using in an X-Force run coming up. You don't want to use. He's a convenient gaff because he's not always around.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's always been X-adjacent. He's never been. He sits right on that cusp of being X-adjacent all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So
they never let him play at the big boy table.
Right.
No, well, they do. They bring him in, and they bring him in, and then they throw him out. And the interesting thing is, he gets some of the best moments because even in the Remender run, when he talks to Genesis, he's the one that says, "You are not defined about what you could become or what Apocalypse became. You can define your own future." And they give Deadpool that role. They don't give it to any of the others. So in some ways, he's more human than the rest of the characters. He's got more empathy, which is weird for me. But they use him to do that all the time. These moments, these soft moments with Gabby in further down the line.
Yes,
they become best friends. He works really well in those situations.
Yeah,
they don't use Wolverine, etc., etc.
And I like how it pays over into his own comic, like how Evan shows up in one of the Deadpool runs, and even in the most recent one with Kelly Thompson, he kind of shows up on Krakoa, and he's like, "Hey, why don't you guys like me? Why do you guys keep treating me so badly?"
That is an awesome issue.
It's an awesome elitist. Yeah. Yeah, that's also on a whole other episode to be examined.
Sure. We have
that whole concept, not necessarily that issue, but that concept as well.
Yeah. Of being X-adjacent, but not really being an X-Men, and how it can rock or it can suck.
Yeah.
And then where we go from there? We end up.
You got the 2 runs by Spurrier.
Yeah. So volume 2 by Spurrier, I haven't finished the second volume by Spurrier, but I know we get Spiral in the beginning. There's a thing with Bishop.
Bishop's in there.
That was a weird thing
early
with Bishop.
on. Yeah.
Like the impression I got was this was the best they could do to redeem Bishop from spending several years trying to kill a baby, and they're trying to redeem him. And I think the Demon Bear comes back very oddly and clunky, or something possessing him. And it was a weird.
The White Owl, wasn't it? The White Owl.
Oh, the White Owl. It was the owl, not the Demon Bear.
There was the whole White Owl storyline in Volume 2. In fact, Volume 2 of Uncanny revolves around this White Owl.
I love the concept of the team for that run. Like, I love that it's Puck on an X team. I love that it's Spiral as kind of a hero working on that team. I love the concept.
Starting off as a drug dealer.
Yes. And but then the execution just, I don't know, like the villain of it being this like time traveling, possessing owl that made Bishop something. It lost me very quickly, and it never got me back.
Yeah, I haven't gotten there yet. I've only read Volume 1, so I'm not quite there yet.
Bishop has this long history at Marvel of writers just not knowing what to do with him. He was an X-File in space for a while, then he was a cop in Mutant Town, then he was a lunatic, tried to kill a baby. There's just all kinds of, we don't know what to do with Bishop.
Yeah.
And then sort of in between there, before we hit the next X-Force run, we actually have Cable and the X-Men.
Yes. No, Cable and X-Force.
And that's X-Force, sorry. Cable and X-Force.
Hopeless.
Dennis Hopeless, yes. And that's actually, I've recently read that entire thing. And that's a lot of fun. Because Domino's in it, and I'll read anything with Domino in it. 100%. The art's very good.
Yeah.
Dr. Nemesis.
I don't know how
Dr. Nemesis is in. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Oh, I was saying that volume started off with Salvador LaRocca on art, and I'm not
Correct.
sure how long he's stuck around, but he's always good.
He's always good, and it kind of splits between, because you've got Cable having these headaches and seeing these visions of the future and pulling the guys. He's come back from the dead.
Yeah.
At this point, Alex is a cop. Let's be quite honest. Alex is working for these idiots. All right. And not my favorite era of Havoc ever. Anyway, so we've got the Uncanny Avengers involved. So Cable's come back. We've had AVX. They find him on a whole bunch of bodies, and now they're all after him. He puts together a team to start stopping all these events that are going to lead to ultimate disaster. But he's having major problems because he's got an issue. The techno-organic virus has been ripped off him. He's got Forge helping him keep the headaches under control. It all kind of spirals out of control. Colossus ends up, after they have a mission that turns into disaster and a whole bunch of people die, Colossus ends up in jail with an alien. They have to break him out. Boom Boom's in it. She's hilarious in this. She's absolutely hilarious in this series. We've got a lot of Forge and Dr. Nemesis have this rivalry, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
From the first issue all the way through. And then it gets a bit weird for a bit. We've got the thing with the aliens and Abigail Brand, and then we've got a story where the adversary possesses Forge. Yeah. Dr. Nemesis has to get him out of that. And then you've also got a story with Hope. She's kind of the counterpoint to everything else that's going on. And there's a story involving the future self and Strife Scimitar and everything else. And that's also really good as well. I mean, and Domino and Colossus hook up, and I'll never forget that because I still think that's a good match. But anyway, and yeah, so that's kind of the summation of the run. I think there's one more chapter at the end, but that it's a really good short run. And from that ends.
I mean, that
and
kind of is. Oh, I was just going to say that's this period where, contrary to like a decade prior, Marvel knows exactly how to make X-Force work from a sales point. And they're really milking 100%. It for all it's worth. You know, you've got two different X-Force books going at the same time. You know, Uncanny X-Force in and of itself spun off 2 spin-offs there. And I mean, shit, it's just firing. Like by this point in the title's history, it's now an intrinsic part of the world of the X-Men, is that there simply will 100%. Be an X-Force book. And then, sorry, Ross, you were starting to say something.
Yeah, and then we move into volume 4 of X-Force from there, which is basically again we Cable, Betsy again, but this time they throw in Marrow. He's got the foulest mouth, almost the entire run, even to the point where there's a really, really good gag where they're on a mission where Psylocke actually does something to her brain. So when she speaks, she hears herself swearing, but she says the most ridiculous non-swearing things at the same time. I'm currently reading that I'm currently reading that run.
You wrote that.
Again, it tends to center.
I'm familiar with that run, or I at least forgotten about it.
It's Spurrier. It's Spurrier, and the initial art is by Rocky Kim, and then also sharing art duties late down the run with Jorge Molina. Well. So it's got some pretty good art, and you got a team. And they drag Phantom X into it as well. And again, it's investigating. It's going after missions and doing things, and they come up against something called Volga, possessed. I can't remember exactly. I haven't finished the thing. And there's one of the really interesting concepts is at this point, Hope is in a coma. But they find this mutant who's captured mutant called, I don't know if it's Meme or Me, because it's Meme. But I don't know if it's meant to be Meme.
I think it is Me.
And Mimi goes on missions with them as this like holographic representation. But down the line, what you find out is by having Mimi near Hope, where she's in a coma, she's taken over Hope's taken over her abilities. Hope is actually me, and is going on the missions to be near Cable, but doesn't want to let him know. And this is not. I was not familiar with this concept at all because I'm reading this run for the first time, and I actually think that's a really, really interesting take.
Right.
And of course, Domino makes her way back into the run a bit further on. Well, and again, I'll read anything with Domino in it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just man, this run just passed me by. I was unaware of it, but I mean,
it's basically 2 arcs. It's 2 arcs. It's 15 issues. It's not a big run, but it's got some moments. Phantom X has an existential crisis in one of the issues because the reason Phantom X is so good at what he does is because he thinks he's perfect. But when somebody he is chasing proves to him he's not perfect and gets away from him, he starts to have a mental breakdown.
Oh wow!
So while he starts to have a mental breakdown, and he's having a conversation with what's his ship's called? What's his ship's called? I always forget its name.
EVA or
yeah.
EVA.
So, but EVA is represented in his brain as a female kind of projection of his subconscious. And he's actually having a really hard time with the fact that somebody beat him. And there's this amazing moment slightly further down in the issues where Dr. Nemesis says to him, take the shot, do what you have to do. You're perfect for the job. And it all of a sudden he has no self-doubt anymore. And he actually kisses Dr. Nemesis full on the lips and says, thank you very much. And bang, he's back. And he's back to being himself again. And I think that, small things like that in X-Force runs, often when you say X-Force to people, it's too serious. I don't like it. It's all about violence. But there are these things like that in these runs that actually make them worth reading. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's volume 4. That's 2014 to 2015.
Then we get to volume 5, which is 2018-2019. It's a pretty brief run. It's written by Ed Brisson. And this is a very deliberate throwback to a 90s style X-Force. To me. That's 100%.
How Straff is in there, and it's violent, and it's got a very, very... The art style is very... Dylan Burnett is an acquired taste. I like Dylan Burnett's art personally, but I know a lot of people on the run were expecting something a bit more traditional. Yeah, when it came to the art. I mean, one of the problems with that run is they had Pepe Larraz doing the covers, and after you've just come out of Extermination, and you've got that wonderful art in Extermination, you expect, and they're doing covers for X-Force, but all of a sudden you open up X-Force, and you've got Dylan Burnett on art. It's quite jarring. Dylan Burnett's on the same line as sort of Jeff Shaw, that kind of art. It's very sharp and angular, and if you're not ready for it, I mean, story-wise, it's an enjoyable little segue into the next piece, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's like a classic by any stretch of the imagination.
I can never make up my mind with this X-Force run. Like you said, the artist is an acquired taste that I have not acquired. There's just something about the shapes of the people that it irks me. Like you have Warpath, who's supposed to have this massive man, but he's not that massive anymore, and he has this tiny little head and
small legs, small head, big chest.
Yeah. Just got out of the shower.
And all of a sudden, Cannonball's back to being this gangly Southern guy when he hasn't been that way since New Mutants. And it was weird art for me. It also involves Kid Cable, who is a character I despise. And it established that this kid who came back in time to kill his future self because he wasn't setting the X-Men back to their original time, and then he doesn't go back to his original time. I'm not sure how that's supposed to make sense. Because if they had to go back, why are you not back? And they don't give us anything to kind of explain that away. But I liked having the old team back together. It was an interesting choice.
Boom
I
Boom's
loved
hilarious in it again.
it. Kind of, to me, it's kind of the setup of alcoholic Boom Boom, which we still have floating
You
around.
think so?
Like, she's absent from the first couple of issues because she's asleep. She sleeps through, and then
She misses the phone call. Yeah, she misses the roll. She misses roll call. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the next time we see her, she's a booze hound over in New Mutants. To me, it Boom Boom has a bit of a problem, and I think it's a logical development for her and the trauma she's been through. So I enjoy that rendition of Boom Boom, and she's just hilarious in everything she's in. But Cable being there, Kid Cable, and Deathlock is a weird one. And just the timing of it set in just X-Men continuity. It's during that time when the X-Men are no more. They're all in Age of X. Then they have some throwaway lines to try to make it make sense, but it just kind of makes me confused as to why they don't address that more. Like Shatterstar is grieving Richter being missing without actually talking about it. And Cannonball just decided to take a year and abandon his wife and child. They did it by addressing it slightly without going in depth. It didn't land the way I wanted it to.
No, I get that.
But it's not a bad series. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
We get Rachel at the ending. She's a badass. And
it's a brief run. It's only 10 issues. I mean, it's really just a filler to get from Extermination.
Exactly.
Everyone else is over in Age of X to ultimately the Dawn of X era.
Yeah. Oh, well, to get to Hox Pox. Basically, it's to round up everything to Hox Pox and then
it's a decent
go from there.
And it's for 10 issues, hell yeah, I'll buy that.
Yeah, I read all of it. I didn't lose interest. I read all of it, but it's not a classic. But it's
Ed
and they don't do there's
gets it.
They don't explore characters in it.
No.
Yeah.
So for me, solid run.
Yeah, it's very much a in the now run. It's not. There wasn't really any depth. They messed with Kid Cable a bit, and they examined him. I think they're also trying to get the audience used to the idea of Kid Cable, because there's obviously plans for Kid Cable already in place going into that. You understand? So they're also trying to get the audience used to it.
But they also gave us the fact that Warpath is canonically into trashy romance novels, which is one of my favorite.
Yes. I forgot about that. You are correct.
It was nice. It was fun. It was a bit odd. But once more, we're sat in continuity. It's when Age of X-Men is happening. It's when Rosenberg is just
killing everybody
without any emotional depth. And then, for me, the only real ongoing, because Age of X-Men was all one-shots, the only ongoing that really competed it was Thompson's Mr. and Mrs. X at the time. So
which was doing its own thing, which I loved.
Exactly. So it was filler episodes. It felt to me, but it was enjoyable filler episodes, so I can't hate on it too much. It tided us over for a bit.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
And that gets us up to the current volume, which is, of course, part of the Dawn of X era of X-Men lore. And this is a pretty... It's hard to just talk about the book in and of itself, and this is true of all of the current crop of X-Men books, because they're so intrinsically tied to this larger narrative of Krakoa and everything that's happened since House of X. But the X-Force now somewhat functions as like a CIA for...
they're now sanctioned. They're a sanctioned government agency.
Yeah.
They work for the government of Krakoa.
Yeah. And as far as the Dawn of X books have gone, this has easily been one of my favorites. but
Yeah,
it's
mine
hard
too.
to talk about it in a vacuum. So I mean,
It's
Rob,
very
you
difficult to talk about
on the regular. How would you put it?
Yeah, because they're all tied to each other. They are. But the thing about it is, I like this book from the beginning because it isn't what I expected it to be.
Yeah.
It isn't. It isn't. Yes, they're doing missions that the X-Men normally wouldn't do. Blah blah fish paste. But there's more of a forensic element to it. There's more of a. Not. It doesn't feel like the straightforward violence. We're just going to go kill people and not do it. And then we're throwing in and then throw into it. If you read X-Force, they're getting their asses kicked constantly in the series. Yeah. This is not we're going to go win every time. People die. Quentin gets killed.
He gets killed like every other panel.
I guarantee you he gets killed next week too. You know what I'm saying? It's also it's not the same guys all together always going on a mission. It's broken up all the time.
Yeah.
Wolverine and Quentin going after Domino. Then you've got Domino with Colossus. It's not quite a cohesive team. Jean's decided she's in it for a bit, then she's out of it. Probably my favorite thing about it is looking at the mistakes they're making. And Beast is fantastic for this. It's because Beast is setting up disaster from day one. Because his ego gets in the way of him seeing what he's doing wrong. And Percy's managed to put together something that, out of all the books, I feel like it reflects the current status quo better than most of the other books. Excalibur is great. It's off doing its thing elsewhere in other world. They're all tied to Krakoa. But I feel that the X-Force is pretty much tied to the island all the time. Yeah. You look at them going after the guys trying to steal the flowers and Domino getting kidnapped because they want to invade the island. And there's great body horror, and Cassara's art with Dean White is some of the best X-Force art I've actually ever seen. It's, Jumps, they do Oscar Bazaldua every now and again, and he's pretty good too. But Dean White and Cassara together, there's a dark, gritty feel about it with there's lots of color though as well. It's really, really good. And I mean, I think Percy's also managed to find a balance between it being a serious, violent book. And there's some really good humor in there. There's some really good moments with Forge. There's some really good. It doesn't take itself as seriously as say, some of the older runs as well. There's a good balance with Percy. Yeah. But it is the more violent action kind of book than, say, Marauders or Excalibur, even though those have got lots of action too. I just think it's a really good addition. So it's no problem.
So one of the things that really draws me to X-Force is it feels more even than the other House of X, Dawn of X titles we have now. Marauders is a Kate Pryde and Emma Frost story. Fallen Angels was a Psylocke story. New Mutants, I haven't been able to figure out what story that is yet. But X-Force it's touched on almost every character. We get peeks into Black Tom and what being on this island means for him and how it's not healthy. We see Domino dealing with her trauma by having it never have happened. We have Colossus dealing with what we don't know yet. Jean coming to the realization that she does not belong there. Beast being a supervillain as usual.
Beast being Beast.
Yeah. And even though we haven't, that I can think of, we haven't had moments for Sage yet. She's kind of on the cusp of becoming this team conscience where she's kind of calling out Beast on things. And it seems like a logical progression of a character that's rarely used. In the same way that we have Quentin, despite dying every issue, he's the first person we've seen that's not fully on board with kind of what Krakoa is doing, that he still has these views of superiority and how that doesn't exactly match completely. Yeah, and that once more fits the character and kind of makes me intrigued on where it's going. So it's very character focused and spread amongst the team, which not I don't think any of the other books are really doing at this time, with the possible exception of Hellions, once it gets a few more issues in, where it's focusing on a lot of people and delving in.
Yeah, I think Hellions is still the Alex and Psylocke show at this point. I don't think we've delved.
Yeah, it's giving us peeks into Grey Crow and Wild Child, where I think it could get there, but it's not there yet. Yeah. So I think X-Force is doing something we're not getting elsewhere, and it's consistently been one of my top books of Dawn of X.
I can't disagree with that.
Percy's been very consistent with the writing.
Absolutely.
The writing has been solid from issue 1.
I'm even able to forgive Wolverine being there because the rest is so good.
But again, you're right, because Wolverine gets some really good parts, but he's not the focal point.
Yeah,
it's even.
I think Colossus and Domino might have had more screen time than Wolverine at this point. If you think about it.
Yeah.
It's a really, really solid book. So that's basically covers all the runs. So top 3 X-Force runs for you. Top 3.
Okay.
On the spot.
On the spot.
In no particular order. On the spot.
The Nicieza run. Uncanny X-Force by Reminder.
Yeah.
And I would actually say the current run.
Okay.
I think I had to put me on the spot and make me pick 3. I think that's probably my 3.
So in my top 3 would definitely be the current one. Would definitely be Nicieza run. I'm blanking on his name because I didn't follow writers back then, but the gentleman that followed Nicieza, if we count it as 2 separate runs.
Jeff Lieb.
Yeah.
Jeff Lieb.
I'll count him in it.
Okay.
Those would be my top 3, because despite how much I love those, I hate everything that happened in the. I dislike everything that happened in the middle. Actually, the After Messiah Complex, the Yost and Kyle run is a close contender.
Okay.
They did some good stuff there.
Yeah, I'm a combination of the 2. It's Remender, the current run, and Yost and Carl. I mean, that being said, I haven't finished this current Spurrier run, and I'm really, really enjoying it. But we'll see. But at this point, those are the 3 for me.
Yeah, I've not read the Spurrier run, and I've not read the Cable and X-Force run, but I've heard a lot of good things about both of them, particularly with what Cable and X-Force did with Marrow and how she got her powers back. Everything I've heard about it is
well, she's a character that probably should have been worked into X-Force a while ago.
Yeah, but she's also had a weird evolution, because remember, she was nasty. She was nasty as hell. Then they made her this pretty thing, and
in love with Gambit.
And then she lost the baby, and then she became evil. Not evil, absolute disaster. It's actually a character worth looking at as a one-sort.
For sure. But well, hey, we're way over our typical hour, but that's okay because we always have fun talking. So thank you all for listening. We apologize for the show being a week later than it normally would have been. Last week, with the sudden passing of Chadwick Boseman, just the day before, we didn't feel like it was appropriate or respectful to be doing any sort of anything celebratory. And it was just out of an abundance of respect for what a lot of people were feeling at the time, the shock and the grief. And of course, we're still feeling it. So the last week just didn't feel right. But thank you all for listening this week. And I think we're going to get back on schedule, which means episode 8 will be coming at you in another just 7 days. Maybe Duna will be back. Maybe she won't. I don't know. She's busy. She's riding the rails right now. So Ross, Gabriel, thank you very much for joining. Thank you everyone who listened. This has been Mutant Watch, episode number 7, whole lot of X-Force. Thank you and good night.
Bye.